All right, I'm going to mute my microphone. You start when you like.
Hi there. My name is Cassie. I currently work for the City of Olympia Crisis Response Unit. Just a little bit about my background. I have a master's degree in human rights law. I've got several years of experience working with refugees and trafficking victims from North Korea, as well as trafficking victims in Pierce County, which is one of the highest regions for sex trafficking in the US, as of a couple years ago when I had checked. And I've been with the Crisis Response Unit now for about the last year and a half, which functions as both alternative and co-response. And the objective today for just my quick 20 minutes is do my best to equip mobile responders to recognize and assist trafficking victims the best I can with trauma-informed and field-ready strategies. Um, and just a quick definition on sex trafficking and how we're going to be referring to it today is an adult that is compelled into commercial sex acts by use of force, fraud, or coercion. But a really important thing to note for a minor is that the force, fraud, and coercion don't need to be in play here. That's any commercial sex act that involves a minor is sex trafficking. So that can include trading sex for a bed to sleep in, food, substances, just kind of anything that's going to fill those basic needs. Um, and just some quick facts to kind of get you in the right mindset. Sex trafficking is really prevalent in the US. About 70% of trafficking cases that are reported to the national hotline involve sex trafficking in one way or another, whether it's the primary um, or just one of the types of trafficking that's involved. And the majority of the victims are US citizens. They're most commonly minors or vulnerable adults. And many of these victims do, in fact, interact with crisis and health systems um, pretty frequently without being identified. So this is really relevant for all of the mobile crisis units so that we're able to kind of be that team who maybe sees these red flags and works on getting the help there a little bit faster. Um, so let's just jump into it. The people who are most at risk for this happening tend to be youth with unstable home lives. That can include things like runaway or homeless youth, LGBT plus youth in a non-supportive family, foster care survivors, domestic violence victims, as well as people with substance use disorders and mental health diagnoses. It's also really important that uh, oftentimes people will imagine that this really just happens to girls. Boys can be just as affected as well. And sometimes it can be harder for them to get help just because of the general image of sex trafficking is really girls locked up. And the reality is that's not the primary way that this happens. Um, Early trauma, especially if it's early sexual abuse, can also be kind of an indicator as well as financial hardship and ongoing abuse. Um, so these situations typically start by someone grooming the victim. So that's going to be the trafficker grooming the victim, oftentimes posing as some sort of a protector. We often see that as a boyfriend or a family member, even. Um, and so once the loyalty is there, that can be kind of where the pitfalls come in. Um, Survival sex is a way that the trafficker can sort of encourage the victim towards this lifestyle. So saying, I did this for you, I protected you, and I need you to do something for me. And using that survival sex and that coercion, once the victim is loyal, um, is really kind of all they need to break those barriers down. There was a trafficker who had actually been interviewed after he had been caught. And once they were interviewing him and talking to him about his tactics and how he got his victims to stay in this lifestyle and in this loop, he would say that if I can get them to do it once, I can get them to do it 1,000 times. So it's really just, using that manipulation and using that coercion to get them to do something that they don't want to do one time. And after that, the trafficker really has a lot of control at that point. And they're able to use, psychological manipulation, threats. Shame is a really, really common one and a very easy one, especially given the societal views and assumptions. Um, the trafficker can also use like confiscation of documents or phones, as well as sometimes forced substance use or even just encouraged substance use. Um, so those are ways that someone really gets that power and control. And if you're familiar at all with the power and control wheel for domestic violence, that can be highly relevant in this situation. They've also made a power and control wheel for trafficking. So I'd highly recommend that you look it up. It's really helpful in understanding the mindset of victims in this situation. And it's really important to know that also when this is happening, the trafficker is also tending to discredit figures of authority. And that can be anywhere from like a social worker to law enforcement to lawyers, any kind of doctors even too, any kind of authority figure that may be in the position of helping this victim does tend to be discredited by the trafficker. And unfortunately a very effective tool. When mobile crisis units are out there and responding, some of the red flags that we can go ahead and look out for are repeated crisis calls to certain areas like motels, apartments with heavy foot traffic, as well as things like party houses. Those are definitely not a requirement, but it's something that can kind of tip you off a little bit. Sometimes the victim can be accompanied by someone who's older and more controlling and sort of prefers to speak for the both of them. Again, not always a thing that has to exist, but it is a good indicator and something to watch out for. Some behavioral signs, typically I have seen in my line of work and from what I've studied, is that this will go one of two ways. So the victim can either be really overly submissive, avoid eye contact and sort of just go with whatever it is that you want to go without necessarily taking part or being an active participant. Or someone can respond in an overly aggressive way and make it known that they don't trust you, they don't like you, they don't want your help. And they're tough enough to do this on their own and they don't need you around. So both of those responses tend to be some larger indicators that, again, maybe something else is going on there. With just one or two of these things, it may not be an indicator, but looking at the whole picture, you can kind of tend to put these together, especially because there may be like physical or mental health clues. And some of those can tend to be like frequent STIs, pregnancy, especially in younger kiddos, untreated injuries, especially if you see that frequently, as well as exhaustion, things like that. On the mental health side, it can tend to look like really high anxiety, PTSD, disassociation, suicidal ideation, substance use, and substance dependence, again, from a really early age. The victim may also come off as manipulative or untrusting, and it's really important for us to recognize that this person is trying to utilize the system that we have in place in order to get their basic needs met. So if they come off as manipulative, that may be them doing what they know how to do in order to get those basic needs met. So it is not necessarily some big fault of theirs that they are trying to use the resources that are available in the best way that they can for themselves. For responders, once we get on the scene, some of the best on-scene sort of response tactics that we can have. Engaging with the victim can be really, really helpful. That doesn't necessarily need to be that we're jumping in and immediately trying to solve the issue. Starting to engage with them first and build that relationship and build that trust, that's going to be really, really important. That's going to be, maybe finding ways to talk to them in a private setting as best as possible. I know sometimes that can be challenging. It can be really hard if the person is consistently either with a trafficker or with a group of people. If you're able to pull that person aside and talk with them and start building that rapport, that really helps. As well as especially using a non-authoritative tone. That's definitely got its time and place. But again, because authority does tend to be a trigger and kind of something that victims will watch out for, using your authoritative tone may not have the best outcomes in this situation. So on that note, using correct language can also be really important, avoiding things like promiscuous or prostitute, things like that, things that might you sort of increase that shame that the person may already feel. That does not typically go over well. Most victims that are in this situation too typically refer to it as being in the life. I'm in the life, like she's in the life, he's in the life. So if you hear that, that is also a very good indicator. They don't typically say, I'm being trafficked or, I'm prostituting myself, things like that. Um, Especially because a lot of victims don't self-identify as being trafficking victims. A lot of them are seeing this as some level of, I'm also taking part in this, and I'm also choosing this, even if the reality is that this is not fully within their control, and this is something that someone is forcing them to do, again, with that force or coercion or whatever type of manipulation that they are using. So not going out and, blaming the victim is also really important and very important when you're building that trust, to not just immediately jump into, why are you doing this? And, you can leave, and trying to do that a little bit too early on. Some of the best phrases I have used in these situations to build that trust and build that relationship is being able to give them some level of autonomy and choice when talking with them. So, would you feel safer talking here, or do you want to talk somewhere else? Giving them those options if you're able to, and letting them know, you don't have to share anything you're not ready to. I'm here to help you. I'm not here to judge. Just laying that on the ground immediately, and also giving them the option to give the information to them, even if they're not ready for it. And if they want to utilize that later, or if they want to contact you later, they can do that as well. Other ones that I have used is also kind of normalizing the situation a little bit. So sometimes I have found that if I just go up front and say, I work with people in difficult situations every day, and again, normalize saying, some feel stuck or scared or controlled. Does that feel familiar to you? Or is there anyone making you do something that you're not comfortable with? Things like this, they can help normalize it and sort of make the tone a little bit softer. So you're not coming out and saying, hey, are you being trafficked? Which may, immediately raise alarm bells that police are going to flood in. I'm going to get in trouble. Something is going to happen. Either my boyfriend's going to get arrested, or I'm going to be thrown out on the streets, or I'm going to lose my access to these basic needs. So that softer language can really help open up the conversation a bit more gently. So I would also recommend not necessarily asking for like proof or details of the abuse. This can often just sort of re-traumatize the victim without really any benefit. It's not often that people are outright saying, I'm being trafficked. If they're not, that's not something that someone should necessarily have to prove before getting some kind of help. I understand that that's necessary for law enforcement, but for those of us who are in crisis response, um, trying to have someone prove something before having access to food or potential housing or things of that nature can really only work to break down that relationship and that trust um, before you've had the chance to even sort of get any good footway there. When you are working to make those those referrals, those reports, that the safety planning, there's also a couple things that are really important to keep in mind as well. One of those is the immediate safety. Um, Ensuring the physical safety of yourself and the person you're talking to in the immediate is very important. If you're trying to talk to a victim who you think may be in imminent physical danger, it might be best to include law enforcement who is trained on the situation and how to deal with these types of situations. If you are trying to talk to a victim and you might not be in a safe situation, it might be better to remove yourself from that situation or to try and talk to the victim again in a more private area. That can be challenging, especially at first. But once that trust is built and once that relationship is there, it is a little bit easier to do that without putting yourself and the victim both in harm's way. If you do not have someone to call, like local shelters, and you don't know where to go with this situation, it can also be very helpful to call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. The number for that is, you can find it, you can Google it. You can also text Be Free on the text tone, the way back, the T9. That will come up as 233733. You're able to text that, get a little bit of information. You can do that for reporting. They can give you numbers for advocates, shelters, nurses that are specifically trained in sexual assault, domestic violence. And they may have connections for LGBTQ plus services as well, which again, because the range of victims is so broad and can be very inclusive for a lot of different vulnerable populations, all of these different types of resources can be very helpful. So after you've been able to get access to that, building some type of safety planning, safe exit planning can also be very helpful. Again, leaving these situations can be very challenging. The person may be having all of their basic needs met by this person, even though they are being used in this way. So being able to walk through safety planning and identify where will the housing come from, where will food come from, and making sure that the victim is safe is going to be really important. And talking with the victim about this and respecting their own autonomy while walking with them and offering a path for either later contact or later aid is going to be really beneficial. This is definitely more of a marathon, not a sprint. I don't think I have ever seen a victim accept help on the first time that someone has offered it to them. Much like domestic violence victims, this can be a cycle, and this can go through stages where the person feels like things are fine and recognizing how dangerous the situation is. So building that trust and that relationship is really going to be the strongest motivator for someone to leave their situation, and just trusting the victim that they are going to accept help when they need it and when they're ready for it. So be consistent and make sure that the person knows that you are a safe person to contact, and that's going to be your strongest tool here. So good luck. I hope that we're all able to go forward with this a little bit easier. It's again only 20 minutes, But definitely do a little bit more research on kind of in your area what you might see and who you might run into, and be aware of those red signs so that you can maybe talk and build that relationship a little bit better with the people that you're seeing. Okay.